So pacemakers, pacemakers, there's about a million different ways to go with pacemakers, but I like to show this slide just because I think it's useful to appreciate what's going on here. We'll start up here at the top. You'll see that there are 1, 2, 3 beats, and then there's several little beats that go along here that are kind of just little atrial beats, and then there's another beat there, and that is actually a pacer spike right down here. And I will show this without this here so you can see that little pacer spike right here is doing its thing. We go over, we have this little pause, nothing happens, and eventually over here we get a little spike, and then we get to that refractory phase where the pacer is saying, if you haven't done anything by now, it's my turn. And then you have a pacer spike that fires right here, and then you have another beat that happens here, which is secondary, and it's entirely native. And then you get to that period again, and over here you fire one more time with the pacer spike, and then it does its thing. So the point is, like right there and then right there again, these pacer spikes are basically a demand pacer where it is set with an escape interval so that if it gets too far, it's going to fire and protect you. That's the whole point of it. And if everything's good and you're doing your job, it won't do its job. That's a demand pacer. That is a synchronous pacer, synchronized with the patient. Whereas the second strip down here, almost the entire strip here, other than this guy right here, it's not really doing anything because it doesn't need to, right? Because the rate is faster. That AFib is enough that you don't have to worry about that. It's just kind of kicking along. And then back at the very bottom strip here, we get down to where it does fire again right there, and then it does fire right here. Now I will say, now this firing not so good because that one's firing specifically at random and it's not recognizing what's going on. It's firing right at the beginning of the relative refractory period of the QT, the T wave there, which is actually concerning because that's putting the patient at risk for QT. Of R on T rather. So there's something wrong with that pacer. It's not all exactly dialed in. And then over on the far right, it looks like there's a pacer spike. Get you a better picture here. Right over here, the pacer spike right in the middle of that. So you have a problem with that pacer. It's not doing its job. It's not obviously getting capture. So it's spiking, but it's not enough energy to do anything. So that doesn't make sense, and that's dangerous. Another picture, demand pacing. Again, this is just there to give you an idea of it's going in and out of demand pacing. Our first couple of beats over here, native beat, native beat, native beat. Actually, this one looks a little different, right? So something's going on here. And if we look down here, we can see that, yeah, that is a pacer spike that fired. And then this is, a change in morphology. This is all demand pacing. These are all pacer spike, and you go, I can't really see a pacer spike. Look around until you find one that does show you that. Down here you can see it pretty clearly. Pacer spike, pacer spike, pacer spike, pacer spike, and then you have this beat that's a native beat, and then pacer spike over here, pacer spike, pacer spike, pacer spike, right? So it's going all over the place. It's helping, then it's getting out of the way, then it's helping, and it's getting out of the way. That is exactly the concept of demand pacing. It's better to be in your native rhythm than it is to be pacing. So if you're able to, you have a better chance of succinctum with both ventricles squeezing at the same time if you are in a native rhythm than you are in a demand rhythm. That's being paced by probably just the right ventricle. And the issue with that is, of course, you look at the difference here. Let me change the color here so you can see. Let's look with this color here. You'll notice the difference, how these narrow complexes all of a sudden become wide complexes, right? Obviously, that's taking more time, and that time kind of off-roading it, where you're not actually on the electrical highway. That's time that you are losing succinctum for your squeeze between the two ventricles. So, big deal. I like this slide just because it's very clear, and if you ever wonder, they talk about the different pacing modes. Remember, it's called a pacer, not a sensor. So if you go, which one goes first, the number, it's always going to pace first, and then it's going to be what's sensed, and then what your response is. So what does that mean? If you have someone who has a VOO pacer, that would be a ventricular paced, not sensed, not responding. It's basically not looking for what's happening. It's not going to be synchronous. It's just going to do its own thing, basically blindly zapping into the dark of the ventricle. So That would be a ventricular pacer V. Now an atrial pacer would be an A pacer, or a D pacer would be both A and V. So a dual mode. So it's very common to see a dual pacer at this point. You'll also see a lot of the rate modulation so that people can have some activity movement, and it doesn't keep them so like I'm going to get up off the couch and my heart rate's still 60 and they pass out. So the idea is they start doing some movement. It should be able to recognize that. And because they are moving, it's going to give them a little bit more of a juice to bump the rate up. But those are more complex versus your less aggressive, older ones that as they phase out, and depending on how much they're used, good 10, 15 years, that you're going to get it replaced anyway. So the technology does absolutely improve with time. And this is a 1987 slide. So keep in mind that the technology is old, but it really is built on a pretty simple electrical system. Now, what's wrong with this pacer? I love this slide because it just cracks me up. You see the pacer spikes just rocking their way all the way through it, and I'll show you those in more detail here. So here's one here, here's one there, here's one there. They're just kind of blasting away right there in the middle of a QRS. That's pretty happy looking normal QRS. So keep in mind that just because you can pace doesn't mean you should. This is someone who has a asynchronous pacer on. It's just blasting at will, but it is very regular, right? So it's doing its thing with no real specific rationale for anything else. So it's definitely not synchronous. It's definitely an asynchronous mode, but it's also not really capturing anything. So it's not really doing you any good whatsoever. So this is a useless pacer. That's just fantastic. And on top of that, you have a nice rhythm that it shouldn't be pacing. So keep in mind that what's wrong with this? Well, it has a failure to sense and a failure to capture. This mode mimics most certainly a asynchronous mode. And this is probably an asynchronous VOO mode that is turned down too low.